George, it's so great to have you here today. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be here, and thank you.
So I think what you're doing is so interesting because the Office of Applied Innovation was set up by Goldman about 2 years ago. You look at this nexus between geopolitics and technology. So tell me, what's most disruptive right now and what are you working on?
Great. Well, yes, it's a really interesting new platform for the firm. Our goals are to allow Goldman Sachs to project thought leadership in that intersection you described, geopolitics, technology, and markets. And so, while we conceived this and built it 2 years ago, subsequent events have only ratified how important this is. You can imagine that matters like U.S.-China competition, the hot conflicts around the world, and the rise of generative AI are topic one in boardrooms around the world. So for me, and where I specialize is really this intersection of generative AI and geopolitics. And look, the rise of this new capability in the world is super consequential for countries and for regions. Matters of economics, defense, and even culture itself, as Jensen Huang talked about the other day here at the WGS.
Absolutely. This has been a central focus at the conference. And one of the things you're also looking at is the way that money and value is going to move around the world.
Yeah.
That's going to be disrupted. It's going to change significantly in the next 10 to 15 years as a result of these emergent technologies that we now see everybody talking about.
Right.
So what are the changes we can expect to see, particularly when it comes to money and value, and why is this a focus?
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the great privileges of the United States is the dollar and how we use it to influence policy and economics around the world. So we're keenly focused on threats that might exist to that privilege. And there are challenges from left and right around that, countries that would like to disrupt and disturb that. Also the rise of new technologies like blockchain and the rise of CBDCs, et cetera, that create new approaches and new platforms for monetary exchange. And so while we're not calling for any abrupt changes in that regard, we're trying to follow both of those paths and be very sensitive to changes in that world. It would be hugely consequential for the U.S. if there was a disruption there.
Indeed, particularly as we look at this era of strategic competition. So how do you see this unfolding? How will machine intelligence impact things like global growth, productivity, and of course this grand competition that we now see unfolding between the US and China?
Right. Well, our economists have called for a very significant impact over a 10-year period, some 1.5% increase in global GDP as a result of this. Now, I think the important thing to reflect on that is it's a 10-year interval. While this has arrived abruptly, it's hugely consequential and fascinating. It will take time for this to deepen its impact across economies around the world. And so, when we're very focused on trying to monitor that. And I think my personal view is there is going to be remarkable productivity and economic gains emerging from this. There's also going to be an incredible leap in human creativity and productivity as we partner with machines to address and solve challenges that have been prohibitively difficult in the past.
As we partner with machines, as if to say they're equals.
In a sense, I think we will co-evolve with these machines. And look, we are very early days in this new generative AI revolution, but the pace of improvement, the trajectory of improvement is so remarkable that I think we do have to think pretty broadly about how we're going to coexist with machines, how we're going to cooperate, and how together we can elevate humanity.
What will determine who will lead the generative world order?
Yeah, and so thank you for referencing a white paper that we wrote on this topic. And, look, the U.S. and China have an early lead in this. Like other technology revolutions, such as the internet, a lot of this sprang from the U.S. and both academic and commercial roots. China is somewhat challenged in this area, both because they're export controlled away from some of the key technologies they need. There's also this issue of the emergent quality of chatbots being somewhat threatening to regimes that are sensitive to social harmony and stability. But make no mistake, they are a formidable adversary and will be leaders in this space. You then have a series of countries, the EU, England, France, et cetera, who both by dint of their economic and commercial influence are going to be very consequential here, and particularly in realms of regulation. Then you have countries that have a particular technology edge in this domain. Those are places like Taiwan, South Korea, the Netherlands. And then perhaps most interesting, you have countries like the UAE, our hosts here, who have done extraordinary work in building their Falcon open source model, the work they've done around Arabic language foundation models, and just the general infrastructure investing they're doing through G42 and other vehicles here.
Indeed, and of course this region has deep pools of public and private capital that are going to be able to enable the development of that technology moving forward. When you look at this issue though, when you take a step back, casting your mind, let's say 20, 30 years into the future, what will be the most significant change that we can expect to see? I guess not from an economic perspective, not from a productivity or competition perspective, but from a human perspective. Yeah. How is this going to impact me?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it behooves all of us to engage with this technology and learn to cooperate with it such that we can, as I mentioned before, elevate our own creativity and impact. I'm really inspired by the opportunity for the partnership between person and machine to elevate scientific discovery. I mean, just in recent months, we've seen these machines and researchers come up with novel classes of antibiotics, solve meaningful mathematical problems that have been difficult to approach, even evince the ability for machines to offer medical care in a way that exceeds human capability in domains like diagnosis and empathy, which is extraordinary. So, one way I like to think about it, and I think Eric Schmidt has written about this as well, is you think about one of the most powerful forces in our world in the last 500 years has been the scientific method. You can imagine that generative AI, the partnership between man, woman, and generative AI, elevates almost every node of that scientific revolution, that scientific method journey. You can have more ideas, you can test more hypotheses, you can analyze with greater acuity, and you can distribute your insights more freely. So, if we're able to shift the curve of that, the impact on the world is going to be quite profound.
This might be the most important question, but I've saved the best for last. How do we ensure globally that there are guardrails in place to make sure that this technology is used responsibly and ethically, and that ultimately it doesn't harm the end user like you and I?
Well, first of all, I admire the effort of global regulators to try to get ahead of this. It's a really difficult challenge. This is a relatively new technology. It's moving very fast, so they're trying to shoot at a moving target. And yet this, I think, good faith effort, motivated in part by the experience of regulators and policymakers around social media, which is that horse was out of the barn before we really tried to address it with regulation. They're trying to get ahead of it. I think it's going to be emergent, and we're going to have to see how it goes. But it is interesting how different regions are projecting different priorities and emphases through their regulatory gambits. And so the EU's very sensitive to privacy issues. As I mentioned, China very focused on social harmony and consistency. And so, look, it's going to be a fascinating journey. Again, I admire the effort of regulators to get out ahead of it, but I think it's going to be hard to get it right.
Would you support a unified body, an IATA-style organization, or a UN, NATO-style organization that ties all of this responsibility together so decisions can be made as a collective rather than a single country level?
I think, in an ideal sense, I think that would be great and very, very powerful. Difficult to organize that. And again, shooting at a moving target. And look, I think we also have to get right here this balance between encouraging something that can have such a profound and positive impact on humanity, but also trying to build appropriate guardrails. And getting that balance right as a transnational organization with all the conflicting objectives and motivations, I think would be difficult. But if we can get there, and as this technology matures, I think that could be, an important step.